Father Thomas stood beneath the soaring stained glass windows, the sunlight painting his white robes in shimmering colors as he raised his hand for silence, his voice trembling slightly as he prepared to deliver the sermon that weighed heavy on his soul. He was a man carrying invisible chains, grieving the sudden death of his sister just 2 months earlier, and the flock gathered before him sensed the darkness hovering behind his soft eyes, though they knew not its source. Today was meant to be a service of hope, a mass for lost souls, and Father Thomas was determined to speak words that might heal others, even if he could not heal himself. The hush inside St. Luke's Catholic Church was so deep that the ticking of the old wooden clock seemed to echo like hammer blows, counting down to something no one saw coming. Rows of elderly parishioners, clutching rosaries, leaned forward as if drawn by a force, hungry for salvation, compassion, or simply to feel seen. Outside, a January wind battered the stained glass like fists, rattling the colored panes until it sounded as though the saints themselves were weeping. In the front pew, an old woman dabbed her eyes, whispering silent prayers for her son, lost to war decades before, while the flicker of hundreds of candles danced across her wrinkled cheeks. The church smelled of incense and old wood, a scent so familiar it nearly lulled Father Thomas into forgetting the ache inside him. But beneath the altar, unseen in the shadows, 2 golden eyes blinked wide and unblinking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And in the instant Father Thomas opened his mouth to speak, the cat sprang. You won't believe how this story unfolds. It's a tale so unexpected it might melt even the hardest heart, and by the end you'll discover that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the heaviest secrets. A flash of orange fur shot through the air, and gasps swept the pews as the cat landed with perfect balance on Father Thomas's shoulder, its claws lightly gripping his vestments while its tail curled around the back of his neck like a strip of fiery ribbon. The priest's breath caught, eyes widening in disbelief, and for a moment the entire congregation seemed frozen, each person held in the same stunned silence, as if heaven itself had pressed the pause button. Someone let out a nervous laugh that quickly turned into a hush, the hush into trembling anticipation, because the cat wasn't just sitting there. It was trying to shove its face closer to Father Thomas's lips, meowing frantically as though delivering a holy command. A beam of colored sunlight fell directly on the cat's green eyes, making them glow almost supernatural, a jade lantern flickering in the dim church. The old organist's hands hovered above the keys, afraid to play another note, afraid to break whatever strange magic had just begun. The weight of 1,000 hidden secrets seemed to hang in the air, pressing on every chest. Father Thomas's heart hammered so hard he feared it might crack his ribs. The cat meowed again, sharper this time, and a single bead of sweat rolled down the priest's temple. For one surreal instant, the entire church seemed to lean forward, inhaling the same shared breath. And then something small and glistening tumbled from the cat's mouth, landing at the priest's feet with a delicate metallic clink. Father Thomas stared downward, feeling his knees weaken, because resting there on the cool marble floor was a gold locket so worn with time that its tiny hinges had nearly rusted shut, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, his vision blurred with sudden tears. Murmurs rippled through the pews as people leaned sideways, trying to glimpse what the cat had dropped, their curiosity as bright and sharp as the candle flames quivering along the altar. The cat, now perched on the priest's shoulder like a sentinel, nudged him gently with its forehead, a soft purr rising from its chest that vibrated through the cloth of his robes. The church was no longer silent. It was alive with whispered prayers and the flutter of nervous hearts. In that moment, Father Thomas felt as if the weight he'd been carrying might finally crack open, letting the light flood in. But alongside that, hope came a terror he couldn't shake, because the shape of the locket was familiar in a way that felt impossible. He bent closer, trembling, as the cat gave one final urgent meow, as if begging him to look inside. And as his fingers closed around the tiny clasp, the whole church seemed to hold its breath. No one in the church had any idea that the locket held a photograph connected to Father Thomas's deepest wound, a wound he'd spent years trying to bury beneath scripture and duty. The cat watched with knowing eyes, as if it had come into his life on purpose, a messenger of secrets too long hidden. The priest struggled to steady his shaking hands, blinking back tears as memories threatened to drown him where he stood. The congregation, oblivious to the private storm raging inside him, began exchanging anxious glances, their faces caught between fear and wonder. A young altar server dropped his candle lighter, the metallic clatter echoing in the silence like a gunshot, and several parishioners jumped at the sound. Outside, the winter wind screamed louder against the church walls, rattling the stained glass until rainbow fragments of light danced wildly across Father Thomas's pale face. It felt as though the cat's arrival had split the service wide open, exposing a truth he was nowhere near ready to share. His chest heaved as he tried to speak, but no words would come. And still, the cat remained poised on his shoulder, eyes glimmering with silent insistence. It was then, with the whole church staring, that Father Thomas made the tiniest move to open the locket, unsure whether he was about to unleash salvation or heartbreak, a secret confession or a miracle in the making. His thumb brushed the tiny clasp, feeling the metal click beneath his skin, a sound almost deafening in the stillness. The cat purred louder, pressing its furry cheek into his ear as if urging him on, a creature both fragile and fierce. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to flee the sanctuary altogether, for he knew that whatever waited inside the locket would change everything he thought he knew about his family, his faith, and the strange patterns of destiny. Around him, the congregation held a collective breath, the air electric with possibility. The flickering candles seemed to lean closer, eager witnesses to a moment that would be talked about for generations. And just before he finally opened the locket, a woman's trembling voice rose from the back pew, crying out a name that froze Father Thomas in place. The name was his sister's. Father Thomas stood frozen beneath the blazing colors of the stained glass, feeling hundreds of eyes burning into his skin as the woman's voice echoed through the church. The name of his sister, still hanging in the charged air like a ghost refusing to leave. The cat pressed closer, its warm body vibrating with an urgent purr, as though sensing the storm raging inside his chest. The woman from the back pew stumbled forward, tears streaking her face, clutching a folded piece of paper that trembled violently in her grasp. A gasp rolled through the congregation, spreading like a wave of fear and curiosity, while the gold locket glinted accusingly between Father Thomas's fingers. His throat tightened so painfully that he feared he might choke, for in that single name, every buried memory clawed its way back into his mind, raw and bloody. The stained glass saint seemed to stare down at him, silently demanding a truth he had kept hidden for far too long. The cat meowed again, louder this time, as if commanding him to act. He blinked hard, fighting the dizziness creeping into his vision. All around him, the faithful shifted uneasily on the wooden pews, uncertain whether they were witnessing a miracle or the unraveling of their beloved priest. And in that moment, Father Thomas felt certain he stood at a crossroads that could shatter his entire life. The cat leapt from his shoulder, landing lightly beside the gold locket, its emerald eyes fixed on the tiny hinge as if willing it to open. Father Thomas stared at the animal, breathless, struck by how impossibly thin it looked up close, ribs sharp beneath a matted orange coat, as though it hadn't eaten properly in days. Its whiskers twitched over trembling cheeks, and a thin smear of dried blood stained one paw, hinting at a fight or an injury suffered before finding its way into the church. A pang of compassion shot through Father Thomas's chest, despite the chaos spinning around him, for he saw in the cat a reflection of his own battered soul, wounded, alone, searching for sanctuary. The woman drew closer, still clutching her paper, whispering the same name over and over in a cracked voice that seemed to peel the paint off the walls. Murmurs rose among the congregation, some people pressing palms together in prayer, others covering their mouths in shock. One elderly man crossed himself repeatedly, as if warding off a curse. Father Thomas felt sweat trickling down his spine, chilling him even in the heat of the altar lights. And still the cat stared up at him, an unspoken demand burning in its gaze. The woman finally reached the altar steps, pressing the crumpled paper into Father Thomas's trembling hand, her eyes glistening with terror and hope. "She left this for you," the woman whispered, her voice quivering like a leaf in a storm. Father Thomas unfolded the note with fingers that barely obeyed him, heart pounding in his ears so loudly he could scarcely hear the collective gasp that rose from the pews. The handwriting inside was unmistakably his sister's, each curve and flourish a familiar echo from years past, and the words scrawled across the page made his knees buckle. "Thomas, I'm sorry. The truth is not what you believe. Please find my locket, and the cat knows where it is." The entire church seemed to sway as Father Thomas clutched the note to his chest, mind spinning in frantic circles, grappling with questions that threatened to split him apart. Why had his sister spoken of a cat? What truth could possibly overturn the story he thought he knew about her death? And how could this battered creature possibly hold the key to it all? His mind reeled with consequences, each possibility darker than the last, for he realized helping the cat and discovering the secret it carried could destroy everything he'd built as a priest, everything the people in this church believed about him. If the truth inside that locket confirmed his deepest fears, his reputation would crumble, his congregation might abandon him, and he'd face not only scandal but perhaps even legal peril if secrets of the past were unearthed. Whispers began to twist through the pews like restless spirits, talk of curses, prophecies, and divine intervention, feeding the rising panic in the church. The bishop might demand his resignation, the press might swarm St. Luke's like vultures, and the faithful might brand him a liar or worse, a fraud. He glanced down at the cat, whose soft mews seemed to echo in the rafters like church bells tolling doom. Yet in the cat's eyes, he saw something he hadn't felt in months, a fragile glimmer of hope. Could this creature truly be heaven's messenger, sent to drag a hidden truth into the light? Or was it merely a coincidence, cruel and inexplicable? He felt torn between duty and an aching, primal need for answers. The weight of choice crushed his chest, leaving him breathless. And then, in one shuddering breath, Father Thomas knew he couldn't walk away anymore. The fear of losing everything was eclipsed by a single, searing need to know the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. He closed his fingers firmly around the gold locket, feeling the sharp edges bite into his palm, as if testing his resolve. The woman beside him let out a sob of relief, clasping her hands as though witnessing a miracle in the making. The congregation fell into a hush so absolute that Father Thomas could hear the scrape of the cat's claws on the marble floor, circling the base of the altar like a guardian spirit. For the first time in months, he felt a strange, trembling courage begin to unfurl inside him, a flicker of light breaking through his grief's heavy fog. The stained glass saint seemed to glow brighter, as if silently blessing his decision, and as the cat leapt back onto his shoulder, pressing its tiny heart against his cheek, Father Thomas lifted his gaze to the congregation, his voice low but resolute. "My friends, there's something I must show you." The cat purred louder, as if approving, and with that, Father Thomas snapped open the locket. A collective gasp filled St. Luke's as Father Thomas flicked open the tiny gold locket, the delicate hinges creaking like old bones. Under a thin layer of dust lay a faded photograph folded so tightly it threatened to tear as he gently pried it open. The cat balanced on his shoulder, its warm breath feathering against his ear as if urging him onward. The photo revealed his sister, smiling in front of the church's stained glass window. But her arm was wrapped around a man Father Thomas never expected to see, a man whose face struck him like a bolt of lightning. The resemblance between the man in the photo and himself was impossible to miss, but the man bore a clerical collar, just like Father Thomas, and the same solemn eyes. A roar of confused voices swelled through the pews as the priest's face drained of color. The woman beside him was sobbing now, whispering prayers as though trying to summon angels for protection. The cat uttered a soft chirp and rubbed its cheek against Father Thomas's, grounding him in the midst of chaos. He stared at the photo, a chill running through his veins as a memory clawed its way back from the shadows. And for the first time, he realized the secret his sister had carried to her grave. Father Thomas staggered back, gripping the edge of the pulpit to keep from collapsing as the truth thundered through his skull. The man in the photo was their estranged older brother, Father Michael, who had disappeared 20 years ago amid hushed rumors of a scandal that had rocked the diocese, but was quickly buried by church officials. Their 1,000 puzzle pieces clattered into place as Father Thomas recalled hushed conversations late at night, fragments of arguments, his sister's haunted eyes when she'd spoken of betrayal. The cat let out a meow that echoed off the arches, its eyes shimmering with something close to triumph. Murmurs rippled like shockwaves through the congregation, people twisting in their pews, craning to see the photograph that seemed to change everything. Father Thomas clutched the locket against his chest, as if trying to protect it from the world. Faces in the pews were pale, some people crossing themselves, others pressing trembling fingers to their lips. The scent of burning wax grew sharper, as though the candles themselves were straining to hear the unfolding confession. The weight of 2 decades of secrets threatened to crush Father Thomas where he stood. He looked out at the sea of worried eyes and felt the trembling resolve in his chest crystallize into something stronger. The cat leapt down, winding around his ankles, as if waiting for him to speak the truth. With trembling lips, Father Thomas confessed to the congregation that his sister's death might not have been the accident they'd all believed, and that the man in the photograph, their missing brother, had been accused of embezzlement and of fathering a child with a parishioner before disappearing. Shock and disbelief rolled through the church like thunder, some parishioners crying out, others simply covering their faces in stunned silence. The cat, unfazed by the uproar, leapt onto the altar table and sat squarely in the center, staring out at the congregation as though daring anyone to deny the truth. Father Thomas felt the release of years of shame and confusion spilling from his chest as he told the people he loved that his sister had discovered new evidence before she died. Evidence that could clear Father Michael's name or condemn him once and for all. An elderly man shouted that this was blasphemy, while a young woman sobbed openly into her mother's shoulder. Father Thomas held up the note his sister had left, reading the words aloud even as tears blurred his vision. A hush fell, heavy as stone, while the cat's rhythmic purring seemed to echo like a heartbeat through the cavernous church. And in that silence, the priest felt a new courage blazing inside him. Soon, news spread outside the church as parishioners began to call family and reporters, the scandal unfolding faster than Father Thomas could comprehend. 2 police officers arrived at the entrance, speaking urgently with ushers, while casting wary glances toward the altar. The bishop himself entered the sanctuary, robes billowing like storm clouds, his face grave as he stepped up beside Father Thomas, demanding to know whether he intended to pursue this reckless public confession. The cat hissed at the bishop, arching its back, green eyes ablaze with fury. Father Thomas raised his chin, feeling stronger than he had in years, and declared that the truth was worth every consequence, that he could no longer bury secrets that had destroyed his family. The bishop stared at him aghast, but before he could reply, the cat darted across the altar, skidding to a stop at the bishop's feet, dropping a second object from its mouth, a small, tarnished key. A gasp went through the church once more. The key glinted under the flickering candles, hinting at secrets yet unrevealed. And suddenly Father Thomas realized that the locket had not been the cat's only mission. In that breathless moment, Father Thomas felt his grief transform into fierce determination. No longer the broken man who could barely finish his sermons, but someone reborn with a mission to uncover the truth and heal the wounds festering in his family and his church. The cat rubbed its side against his cassock, its purr vibrating like thunder rolling far off in the distance. Parishioners who moments before looked upon him with suspicion now seemed drawn toward him, faces softening with cautious empathy. An elderly woman stepped forward, wiping her eyes, and whispered that perhaps the cat was a sign from God, a messenger carrying forgiveness. The bishop hesitated, eyes darting between the priest, the cat, and the tarnished key lying on the marble. And for the first time in many long months, Father Thomas felt a surge of hope, as though the dark clouds in his chest had finally cracked open to let the light pour through. He took a deep breath, gripping the cat gently, and turned back to the congregation, ready to lead them into a new chapter none of them had foreseen. The candles burned brighter, flames swaying as though bowing in reverence. And in the hush that followed, the cat let out one last soft meow, as though to say the story wasn't over yet. Father Thomas stood at the altar days later, sunlight once again streaming through the stained glass. But this time the colors felt less like a weight pressing on his chest and more like gentle arms wrapping around him. The cat lay curled on the velvet cloth beside the open Bible, its soft purring filling the quiet spaces between Father Thomas's words as he addressed a congregation smaller than usual, but leaning forward with fierce attentiveness. The tarnished key now hung on a thin chain around Father Thomas's neck, glinting like a talisman as he spoke of secrets brought into the light and the power of forgiveness. The police investigation had already begun, and Father Thomas promised his congregation he would cooperate fully, even if it meant facing truths that might devastate the church's reputation. Yet in his voice, there was strength rather than fear, as though shedding his burden had made him taller somehow. The cat raised its head every so often, as though nodding in approval, its golden eyes soft but watchful. A hush of reverence lingered in the pews, punctuated only by an occasional cough or the rustle of a hymnal. Father Thomas scanned the faces before him, noting the absence of a few long-time parishioners who could not yet bear the scandal. But many remained, clasping hands, eyes shining with hesitant hope. And deep inside, Father Thomas knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Small gestures had begun to show how both man and animal were healing together, each day weaving new threads of trust between them. Father Thomas had taken the cat into the rectory, where he named it Gabriel, believing the creature to be his unlikely messenger. Each morning, Gabriel would curl around his feet while he brewed coffee, gently batting at the locket and key, as though reminding him that the past still needed to be faced. In the evenings, Father Thomas sat beside Gabriel on the worn rectory sofa, reading aloud passages from Scripture, or simply resting a hand in the cat's warm fur, finding comfort in its steady presence. Parishioners began bringing food and blankets for the cat, leaving gifts at the rectory door like offerings at a holy shrine. One young altar server, inspired by Gabriel's story, declared he wanted to become a veterinarian, determined to help animals who might carry secrets of their own. The bishop, initially rigid and stern, began to soften, visiting Father Thomas and Gabriel to discuss how the church might embrace honesty and healing. Even the stained glass seemed to glow with new life, its colors dancing across the church walls like blessings. And in the quiet hours just before dawn, Father Thomas often whispered thanks to God for sending him an angel with whiskers. For the first time in years, he no longer dreaded waking up. Word of the cat's intervention and the priest's confession spread beyond the parish, capturing the attention of local news stations and social media. Reporters stood outside St. Luke's, cameras pointed toward the heavy wooden doors, eager for the next chapter in the unfolding drama. Interviews with Father Thomas revealed a man humbled yet resolute, speaking earnestly about his family's past and the importance of truth, no matter the cost. The story ignited conversations across the community about forgiveness, hidden wounds, and how faith could survive even the deepest betrayals. Donations began pouring into the church, not to hush the scandal, but to support the parish's transparency and courage in facing its darkest shadows. Father Thomas proposed starting a charity in his sister's name, offering counseling for families fractured by secrets and veterinary assistance for stray animals in memory of Gabriel's miraculous arrival. People from neighboring towns traveled to St. Luke's, drawn by a cat who seemed to have bridged the divide between heaven and earth. Even skeptics found themselves moved by the priest's raw honesty. And though some parishioners still struggled with doubt, Father Thomas felt hope that time and compassion could mend even these rifts. The cat, meanwhile, seemed to bask in the new attention, posing calmly for cameras as though he'd always been destined for the spotlight. The once somber atmosphere of St. Luke's transformed into something vibrant, as though the church itself had been given new breath. Services felt different now, more personal, more authentic, as Father Thomas spoke openly of his pain and redemption, refusing to hide behind platitudes. Parishioners approached him after Mass, confessing secrets of their own, tears spilling as they shared burdens they'd carried in silence for decades. Gabriel, the cat, often slipped among them, curling into laps or nudging trembling hands until smiles replaced tears. The bishop, impressed by the growing unity in the parish, announced plans to support Father Thomas's charity, declaring that perhaps the Holy Spirit truly did work in mysterious ways, even through a stray cat. Choir hymns rang brighter, echoing off stained glass that glimmered with renewed brilliance. The community began organizing outreach efforts, not just for humans but for abandoned animals, inspired by the idea that every creature might carry a piece of someone's salvation. And in this new season of change, Father Thomas found himself eager to serve again, no longer a man merely reciting prayers, but one who lived the gospel with every trembling, hopeful breath. Gabriel remained his silent partner, always watching, always reminding him that miracles sometimes arrive on 4 tiny paws. Quiet evenings in the rectory became moments of reflection and gentle gratitude for Father Thomas, who found unexpected joy in small routines that had once felt hollow. He discovered he loved brushing Gabriel's fur, hearing the cat's contented purr as soft proof that life still held sweetness. Parishioners stopped by to visit the cat, leaving treats and toys, creating a steady stream of laughter and light in the once lonely house. Father Thomas placed the locket and key in a small glass case beside the altar, a reminder to the congregation that truth, even painful truth, could become a sacred relic, teaching forgiveness and strength. He noticed how his sermons grew warmer, richer with real human experience, and how people seemed to lean in, hungry for the raw honesty they found in his words. Children gathered around Gabriel after services, giggling as he chased bits of ribbon down the church aisle. Even the old organist, who'd nearly fainted the day the cat first leapt onto Father Thomas's shoulder, now winked at the cat as she played hymns. The shadows in Father Thomas's eyes began to fade, replaced by a glow that parishioners whispered was nothing short of miraculous. And as each day passed, the priest found himself believing that sometimes the smallest creatures carried the largest grace. In Gabriel's gentle gaze, he saw not just a cat, but the doorway to his own salvation. He didn't just save a cat, he found himself.